My name is Captain Caitlin Fairbanks Lewis, 34 years old. 4 years ago, on the eve of Mother's Day, I was erased from my own bloodline. Not by enemy fire on the battlefield, but by a cold text my mother sent to the family group chat. All my children are successful except Caitlin, who chose to be an ordinary soldier. I no longer consider her my daughter. I didn't cry. A soldier's discipline doesn't allow it. I simply cut contact, evaporated just as she wanted. But she didn't realize that 4 years later, I would stand on a stage before 500 high-ranking officers to be honored. And she would crawl back, sitting in the VIP section uninvited, hungry to steal the spotlight only to have her mask ripped off in front of the whole hall. Before I tell you what happens next, take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story truly touches your heart. Where are you watching from, and what time is it there? Let me start from the beginning. Growing up, the Fairbanks clan always saw themselves as the gold standard of perfection in suburban Virginia, where my mother, Margaret, valued her children not by character, but by Hermes bags and memberships at the Westbrook Club. To the world outside our gated community, the Fairbanks name meant old money, sharp suits, and clinical precision. My sister, Victoria, lived in a penthouse in Richmond, her days filled with overpriced champagne and the hollow click-clack of her heels on marble floors. She liked to show off her Rolex, its diamonds catching the light during charity galas where the air was thick with perfume and hypocrisy. Then there was Bradley. He drove his black Mercedes G-Wagon around D.C. like he owned the streets, his wife Carolyn in the passenger seat clutching limited edition handbags that cost more than a veteran's yearly pension. They lived in an ecosystem of air conditioning, high-limit credit cards, and staged smiles. I was the scratch on their polished surface. I didn't wear silk or carry Italian leather. I wore a combat medic's uniform that reeked of industrial disinfectant and the iron scent of dried blood. While they spent their weekends at the country club, I was face down in the mud, crawling through the grit of Virginia's backwoods. My skin was tanned by the sun, not a spray tan booth, and my hands were a map of scars and calluses. I chose to save lives in the dirt, while they chose to serve their own vanity in the light. The night it all ended began at 11:47 p.m. on May 9th, 2020. I had just stumbled into my government-issued apartment after a 12-day field training exercise. My lungs felt like they were filled with glass shards. My feet were a mess of raw blisters, and every muscle in my back was screaming. I let out a low groan, unbuckling the straps of my ruck. The 20-kilogram pack hit the hardwood floor with a heavy, bone-jarring thud. Dust kicked up into the stale air of the small room. My phone vibrated on the kitchen counter. The screen's harsh blue light sliced through the darkness, reflecting off the metal sink. It was Rachel, my cousin, the only one in that house who still had a damn soul. I picked up. Rachel's voice came through the speaker, thin and shaking, like glass about to shatter. "Caitlin." "Oh God, Caitlin, they did it. They actually did it. They've scratched your name off the list. You're gone." I stood there, frozen. The air in my chest felt like it had been sucked out by a vacuum. My hand tightened around the cold plastic of the phone. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. I hung up and opened the app. The group chat was titled Fairbanks Family Dinner, a name that used to mean something, now just a digital slaughterhouse. At 8:32 p.m., Margaret, the woman who carried me for 9 months only to treat me like a bad investment, had issued her decree. The words were black on the screen, cold and final. No more daughter, no more Fairbanks. Victoria's response? A single heart emoji. No words, just a digital stamp of approval on my execution. Bradley was even worse. "Got it, Mom," he'd replied. Short, obedient, a coward hiding behind his mother's skirt and his wife's bank account. Nobody asked why. Nobody stood up for the sister who spent her Christmas in a humid field hospital while they were unwrapping luxury watches. They threw me out of the clan like a crumpled, grease-stained receipt from a cheap diner. I sank onto the edge of my bed, the springs creaking under my weight. My eyes were glued to that screen. I read those sentences exactly 47 times. I didn't read them like a grieving daughter. I read them like an intel officer analyzing a hostile movement. I looked for a gap, a mistake, a sign of hesitation. There wasn't one. It was a clean kill. Hot tears burned the corners of my eyes, but I swallowed hard. I bit my inner cheek until I tasted the metallic tang of blood. A Fairbanks doesn't cry, and a soldier doesn't break. Not in front of the enemy. My thumb hovered over the buttons. A sharp, dry click echoed in the silent room as I took the screenshot. I didn't stop there. I walked over to my desk, grabbed my encrypted USB drive, and plugged it into the laptop. I moved that image into a hidden folder. That wasn't just a photo. It was ammunition. I didn't call Margaret to scream. I didn't send flowers or a long-winded apology letter begging for a seat at her precious table. I didn't give them the satisfaction of knowing I was bleeding. Instead, I reached over and hit the switch. Silence. Absolute, tactical silence. When the enemy slams the door in your face, you don't knock until your knuckles bleed. You stay in the shadows. You dig your trench. You sharpen your blade. And you wait. I'm staring at the white medical tape wrapped around my knuckles. It's a habit, a tick. I peel it back slowly, revealing the jagged, silvery line that runs across my thumb. Most people see a scar. I see the exact moment my mother decided I was dead to her. The betrayal that happened in that group chat wasn't a sudden strike. It was a slow-growing mold, eating away at my family for years. The first real crack appeared back in the summer of 2014. Back then, the air in Virginia was a wet blanket of heat and humidity. Margaret had it all mapped out. She'd spent months pulling strings and making calls to people who smelled like mothballs and old money. She'd secured me a pre-med scholarship at the University of Virginia, the prestigious UVA. She didn't want me to be a doctor to save people. She wanted a clone of Victoria. She wanted a daughter in a white coat sitting in a high-end plastic surgery clinic, a shiny tool she could brag about at the Westbrook Club over gin and tonics. "It's about the Fairbanks brand, Caitlin," she told me, her voice as sharp as a scalpel. "A doctor in the family is an asset. A soldier is just help." But that summer, I was at a civilian first aid training course in the hollows of the valley. That's where I met Marcus Jr. He was 8 years old, with eyes the color of old pennies and a laugh that could cut through the thickest fog. The accident happened fast. A heavy equipment failure at the site. A scream that stopped the world. I didn't think. I didn't wait for a supervisor. I just moved. I lunged forward, my knees slamming into the red Virginia mud. Marcus Jr. was on the ground, his chest crushed, his breath coming in ragged, wet rattles. I pushed my bare hands against his small chest, the warm metallic tang of blood instantly soaking my shirt. I pumped. 1, 2, 3. Breathe. For 40 minutes, the world was nothing but the sound of my own grunting breath and the slick, sliding feeling of mud under my boots. My muscles burned like they were on fire. My hands were stained crimson. Every second felt like an hour. I looked at that little boy, and I didn't see an asset. I saw a life that didn't want to go out yet. By the time the medevac helicopter appeared, its blades screaming and kicking up a storm of dust and dry leaves, Marcus Jr. was breathing again. I sat there in the dirt, watched them lift him away, and I knew. I didn't belong in a glass office or a sterile VIP clinic. I belonged on the front lines, in the mud, where the air is thick with sweat and the stakes are life and death. That night, I called Margaret. I told her I was turning down UVA. I told her I was applying to the military academy. There was a silence on the other end of the line. I counted the seconds. 1, 2, 3. 17 seconds of absolute, bone-chilling silence. I could hear the faint clink of an ice cube in her glass. Then she spoke. It wasn't a mother's voice. It was a predator's hiss. "You're gonna throw your life away, Caitlin?" "For what? For a government paycheck and some meaningless battles in the dirt? You want to be a servant? Fine. Be a servant. But don't expect me to watch you crawl." She hung up. The dial tone sounded like a flatline. The punishment started immediately. It was a Cold War. A year later, I stood on the parade deck for my commissioning ceremony. The sun was beating down, and the brass on my uniform was polished until it shone like gold. I looked at the row of chairs reserved for families. Victoria's seat, empty. Bradley's, empty. Margaret's, a hollow mocking space between a stranger's uncle and a potted plant. They didn't show. Not for the girl who saved an 8-year-old's life, only for the girl who could have bought them more social status. That afternoon, a courier arrived at my barracks. He handed me a thick, cream-colored envelope. I recognized Victoria's neat, looping handwriting on the front. Inside was a check for exactly $50. There was a small handwritten note clipped to it. "Good luck with your little gun-carrying career. You're gonna need it once you realize how much the dry cleaning for those uniforms costs. Don't call us." I stared at that check. $50. That was the price they put on my soul. That was the value of my choice to serve something bigger than a Fairbanks bank account. I didn't cry. I didn't even get mad. I just walked over to the trash can and let it go. I watched it flutter down into the waste, settling among the discarded energy drink cans and boot-shining rags. I made my choice that day, and I ain't ever looked back. But I gotta ask you all, have you ever had someone you love try to put a price tag on your dreams? Have you ever been told your passion was too small just because it didn't make them look good? I need to know I'm not alone in this trench. If you've ever felt like the black sheep for choosing honor over money, hit that like button and comment the word loyalty below. It helps me keep telling this story, knowing there's a real family out there listening. I thought the $50 check was the ultimate insult. I was wrong. That was just the warm-up for the lie they'd tell the world while I was away. I used to think the battlefield was the only place where you had to watch your six every second. I was wrong. The most dangerous territory I ever stepped into was my mother's dining room during the holidays. In the Army, they teach you how to survive a firefight. They don't teach you how to survive the cold, calculated silence of your own bloodline. The neglect didn't just show up in those $50 checks. It crawled into every holiday, every tradition, like a slow-acting poison. Take Thanksgiving 2019. I'd just finished a 6-month rotation in a place where the sun felt like a blowtorch and the dust never left your throat. I drove 3 hours to Virginia, my spine still stiff from riding in armored vehicles, my uniform pressed so sharp it could cut paper. I wanted a piece of home. I wanted to feel like I belonged somewhere that wasn't a sand-swept outpost. I walked through the front door, the smell of roasted turkey and expensive stuffing hitting me hard. Margaret was standing in the foyer, draped in cashmere, her smile as thin as a razor blade. She didn't hug me. She didn't ask if I was okay. She just gave my boots a quick, disapproving glance. "The main table's full, Caitlin," she said, her voice smooth and empty. She pointed a manicured finger toward the corner of the kitchen. "Go ahead and sit at the folding table with Carolyn's kids. There's no room in the dining room." I'm 33 years old. I've led teams through chaos. I've saved lives while mortars were screaming overhead. And there I was, sitting at a white plastic folding table that creaked under the weight of a lukewarm plate of turkey. I spent the night chewing on dry meat while the sounds of crystal clinking and refined laughter drifted in from the other room. I watched them through the doorway. Margaret, Victoria, Bradley, and Carolyn. They were bathed in warm golden light, toasted with vintage champagne. To them, I wasn't a daughter or a sister. I was an uninvited guest, a ghost in a green suit. Christmas was the day the frost really set in. I'd been working overtime, pulling double shifts to rack up hazard pay. That's blood money. It's the extra cash the government gives you when your life is on the line every damn day. I'd saved every cent of it to buy Margaret something special. A hand-woven wool shawl from a small boutique. It was soft, heavy, and expensive. I thought it might finally bridge the gap. I thought it might make her see me. When it was her turn to open it, she lifted the shawl with 2 fingers like it was a wet rag she found on the street. "Oh, it's warm," she muttered. She didn't even wrap it around her shoulders. She just slapped it down on the arm of her chair and moved on. 2 minutes later, Victoria handed her a small rectangular box wrapped in gold foil. Inside was a Chanel wallet. a piece of leather with a logo that probably cost more than my monthly base pay. Margaret's face lit up like a Christmas tree. The whole room spent the next 20 minutes passing it around, oohing and ah-ahing over the stitching. My shawl? It slipped off the chair. By the end of the night, it was lying on the hardwood floor, getting kicked under the sofa by Bradley's youngest kid. I didn't pick it up. I just sat there, my jaw tight, my pulse thudding in my ears. I realized right then that the Fairbanks family didn't trade in love. They traded in brand names. If you didn't have a logo, you didn't exist. The final execution happened early in 2020. It was Margaret's birthday. I called her 3 days early to ask what time the dinner started. I already had my dress picked out. I'd even cleared my schedule for the whole weekend. "The restaurant only has a table for 6, Caitlin," she said, her voice crackling over the line, as indifferent as a weather report. "It's just going to be me, Bradley, Carolyn, Victoria, and 2 of my friends from the club. Maybe next time, honey." She didn't even wait for me to respond. She just cut the connection. I stared at my phone for a long time. 6 people. She'd rather invite 2 random strangers from her social circle than her own daughter. She didn't hate me. Hate takes effort. She just found my existence inconvenient. I didn't fit the frame of her perfect family portrait. My uniform, my scars, my ordinary life. They were all smudges on her masterpiece. I've been in the trenches. I've trusted my 6 to brothers in arms who didn't share a drop of my blood, knowing they'd die to pull me out of a hole. But in that house, I was a refugee. The Mother's Day text that came later wasn't a shock. It was a mercy kill. It was the final bullet that ended a long, agonizing execution. It gave me the permission I needed to stop trying, to stop bleeding for people who only saw me as a bad investment. But as I sat in my dark apartment, looking at that screenshot for the 40th time, I realized something. Margaret wasn't just being cruel. She was hiding something. Rachel had sent me a follow-up message that night, one that didn't make sense until I started digging. She mentioned a legal document Margaret had been obsessing over, a document that had my name on it, buried under layers of Fairbanks corporate bullshit. I leaned back, the silence of the room ringing in my ears. Margaret thought she'd erased me. She thought she'd swept me off the table like a dirty crumb. She was wrong. She didn't just throw me out. She stole something that belonged to me. And I was going to find out exactly what it was. 6 months? That's how long it took for the Fairbanks family to officially bury my memory under a layer of expensive dirt and filtered photos. 6 months since that Mother's Day text. Since I was cauterized from the family tree like a diseased limb. I was sitting in a tactical medical tent in the middle of a training range in North Carolina. The air inside was thick with the smell of stale coffee, industrial-grade antiseptic, and the sour sweat of 24 soldiers. Outside, the rain was turning the soil into a thick, red soup. My boots were caked in it. My uniform was damp, clinging to my shoulders like a second, heavier skin. Then, my phone let out a sharp ting. A notification from Rachel. I swiped the screen with a thumb that was still stained with grease from cleaning a field kit. It was a screenshot. A Facebook post from Victoria. The image was bright. Too bright. It was a Thanksgiving dinner spread that looked like it belonged in a lifestyle magazine. A mahogany table polished to a mirror shine. Crystal glasses filled with deep red wine. Margaret was in the center, her pearls gleaming, flanked by Victoria and Bradley. They were all wearing those rehearsed, blindingly white smiles that didn't reach their eyes. The caption read, "So grateful for my wonderful family. Mom, you raised us so well. 3 of us, not 4. I stared at that last sentence. 3, not 4. It wasn't that they'd forgotten me. You forget a set of keys, you forget to pick up milk. This was intentional. This was a surgical strike. They were publicly announcing that I didn't exist. They were cropping me out of their history, 1 pixel at a time. A hollow laugh escaped my throat, lost in the roar of a transport truck passing outside the tent. The cruelty was impressive. Most people just stop calling. The Fairbanks? They hold a funeral for you while you're still breathing. But then, the second part of Rachel's intel came through. Caitlin, you ain't gonna believe what Aunt Margaret is telling people at the Westbrook Club. The text read, "She's telling everyone you're a high-level military attaché stationed in Europe. Said you're a strategic advisor for the Pentagon, working in those high-security glass rooms in D.C. She's even showing off a fake photo of a woman in a suit at a gala, claiming it's you." I leaned back against a stack of olive drab crates, the cold metal biting into my spine. The hypocrisy was thick enough to choke on. Margaret didn't hate me because I was a soldier. She hated me because of the kind of soldier I was. She couldn't brag about a daughter who spent her nights kneeling in the dirt, plugging shrapnel wounds with her bare hands. She couldn't show off a daughter who smelled like gunpowder and diesel. That version of me made her friends uncomfortable. It made her look like she'd failed to produce another polished asset. So, she killed the real me. She invented a phantom, a diplomatic Caitlin who wore tailored blazers and attended embassy dinners, a ghost that served her vanity. She was using my service to buy social capital while throwing my actual life in the trash. I felt a coldness settle in my gut. It wasn't sadness. It was the kind of stillness you feel just before the countdown hits 0. I realized then that Margaret Fairbanks didn't just have a mean streak. She was a goddamn narcissist who viewed her children as nothing more than accessories. If the accessory didn't match her outfit, she'd lie and say she was wearing something else. I looked at my hands. They were rough. The nails were short. There was a faint tremor of exhaustion in my fingers. This was my reality. It was hard and it was honest. And my mother found it unsightly. That was the moment I turned into stone. I stood up, my joints popping. I walked over to the edge of the tent and looked out at the rain. I pulled a burner phone from my pocket, the one I'd used to keep a window open to that old life. I didn't send a long, emotional email. I didn't call Bradley to ask how he could be such a coward. I didn't go to Victoria's page to defend my honor. Those were the actions of a victim. I was a soldier. And soldiers understand the value of tactical silence. I went into my settings. One by one, I blocked every single number associated with the name Fairbanks. I shut down my old social media accounts. I changed my primary phone number. I wiped my digital footprint until I was nothing but a shadow. I was going dark. I treated this like a deep cover deployment in hostile territory. If they wanted a family of 3, I'd give them exactly what they asked for. I'd be the ghost they created, but I'd be a ghost they could never reach. I wasn't gonna beg for a seat at a table that was built on lies. I was gonna build my own. As I packed my gear, throwing my med kit and my ruck into the back of my rugged, beat-up truck, I felt a strange sense of lightness. The ting-ting of the notifications was gone. The weight of their expectations had finally snapped. I drove away from that range, the tires of my truck splashing through the mud. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I had no home to go back to in Richmond. No family waiting for me in the suburbs. But as the steel door of my old life slammed shut, I found myself driving toward a place I'd only visited once. A place where the air didn't smell like perfume or disinfectant. It was a small, quiet road in the foothills. A place with a simple wooden gate that was starting to peel. Margaret thought she'd erased me. But she forgot one thing about soldiers. We're real good at finding our way home, even when we have to build it from scratch. And I'd just found the coordinates for mine. The air at Webb Family Organics didn't smell like Richmond perfume or hospital bleach. It smelled like reality. Damp soil, curing hay, and the sharp, clean scent of crushed mint. It was autumn, 2021. I was leading a small civil support medical team, providing health screenings for local farmers in the rural outskirts. After months of tactical ghosting, of living as a shadow without a last name, the farm felt like a decompression chamber. It was a place where things grew because you nurtured them, not because you bought them. That's where I met Marcus Lewis. He didn't walk like a civilian. He had that unmistakable, straight-backed Marine posture that 20 years of service irons into your spine. His eyes were steady, the kind of eyes that had seen the worst of the world and decided to focus on something better. He wasn't planting landmines anymore. He was planting rows of organic kale and heirloom tomatoes. He moved with a quiet, deliberate economy of motion, his big hands working the soil with a tenderness that surprised me. By his side was Lily. She was 5 years old, a tiny thing with messy pigtails and a gap-toothed grin that could probably stop a bullet. Marcus was raising her alone. Cancer had taken his wife a year prior. They were two broken pieces trying to hold each other together in a world that often felt too loud and too fast. They looked a lot like I felt. Isolated, guarded, just trying to survive the day without stepping on a hidden emotional landmine. On the final afternoon of our mission, I found a moment of quiet under a massive, gnarled oak tree at the edge of the property. The sun was dipping low, painting the Virginia sky in bruised purples and burnt oranges. I slumped against the rough bark and started unlacing my boots. My feet ached. My soul ached more. I was still carrying the weight of that family of 3 Facebook post in my marrow. A shadow fell over me. I looked up. Marcus was standing there, holding a small bundle wrapped in crinkled aluminum foil. He didn't ask if he could sit. He just dropped down onto the grass, a comfortable distance away. "Pie," he said. His voice was a low rumble, like distant thunder over the mountains. "Lily made me promise to give you the biggest slice we had." I took the bundle. The foil was warm against my palms. I peeled it back to find a thick, messy wedge of apple pie. It wasn't pretty. The crust was jagged and the cinnamon was clumped in spots, but the smell was intoxicating, sweet, tart, and honest. "Thanks," I muttered. I took a bite. It was still hot, the apples soft and spiced. We sat in silence for a long time. In the military, silence is a tool. Between veterans, it's a language. Marcus didn't try to fill the air with small talk about the weather or the crops. He just sat there, looking out at his fields. "You gotta look about you, Captain," he finally said. He didn't turn his head. The kind of look someone gets when they've been fighting a war on a front they didn't sign up for. A war where the enemy uses your own name against you. I swallowed a mouthful of pie. It felt like lead in my stomach. "I don't have a family, Marcus," I said, my voice flat and even. "I'm an outcast. A bad investment that got liquidated by the board of directors. I'm a ghost." Marcus didn't offer pity. He didn't say he was sorry. He just took a bite of his own pie and chewed slowly, his gaze never wavering from the horizon. "Family ain't always blood, Captain," he said. "Sometimes blood is just the stuff that makes you bleed. Real family? That's the people who hold the line with you when everyone else has turned tail and run. They're the ones who stay in the trench when the mortars start falling and the sky turns black." He looked at me then. Truly looked at me. And for the first time in 34 years, I felt like someone was seeing the person behind the rank and the scars. A year later, in 2022, we got married under that same oak tree. There wasn't a $1,000 designer dress. There wasn't a 12-tier cake or a guest list full of Richmond elite. It was just me, Marcus, Lily, and a handful of guys Marcus had served with. I wore a simple white sundress, and Marcus wore his best charcoal suit. It was the most honest thing I'd ever done. That same year, I officially signed the papers to adopt Lily. The night after the adoption went through, Lily crawled into my lap while I was sitting on the porch. I watched her small hands move as she handed me a piece of paper. It was a drawing in waxy crayons, 3 stick figures. 1 big man with a green shirt, 1 woman with a messy bun, 1 little girl with pigtails. Underneath, in shaky, oversized letters, she'd written, "My mom, my dad, me." My armor didn't just crack, it shattered. I pulled that little girl into my arms and cried into her hair, smelling of sunshine and dirt. I wasn't a failed asset anymore. I wasn't an ordinary soldier who didn't measure up to a Chanel wallet. I was a mother. I was a wife. I was a Fairbanks who had finally found a home that didn't require a background check or a credit score. I rewrote my own history that night. I didn't need Margaret's approval. I didn't need Bradley's cowardice or Victoria's vanity. I had my own trench now, and it was filled with love. With a solid foundation at home, my career took off like a rocket. By early 2024, I'd been promoted to major. I was the regional medical commander, overseeing healthcare for thousands of personnel. I worked hard not to prove Margaret wrong, but to prove Marcus and Lily right. In March, the news broke. The governor's office announced the annual honors. I was named Officer of the Year for my work in civilian military medical integration. My face was on the front page of the local papers. Major Caitlin Fairbanks Lewis, a hero of Virginia. I sat at my kitchen table, looking at the headline while Marcus poured me a cup of black coffee. The farm was quiet. The sun was just starting to hit the barn. "You deserve it, honey," Marcus said, squeezing my shoulder with his big, calloused hand. I smiled. I felt whole. I felt safe. Then my phone buzzed on the table. It was an email notification. I didn't recognize the address, but I recognized the tone. The vultures had caught the scent of glory. The Fairbanks were done erasing me. Now they wanted to claim the hero they'd spent years trying to kill. I looked at the screen, and the coffee in my mug felt cold. "What is it?" Marcus asked, his eyes narrowing. I didn't answer. I just stared at the name at the bottom of the message. The war wasn't over. It was just moving to a new coordinate. The silence of the last 4 years didn't end with a bang. It ended with a ping in the middle of a Tuesday morning. I was sitting on my porch, the air smelling of damp pine and wood smoke, a cup of black coffee cooling in my hand. I looked down at the screen. An email. No subject line. Sender, Margaret Fairbanks. My stomach did a slow, nauseating roll. I didn't want to open it. I knew that name was a trigger for a landmine I'd spent years buried under. But a soldier doesn't ignore a threat. I tapped the screen. "Caitlin, dear, no need to apologize to me. Mother's Day is coming up soon, and it would be wonderful if the family gathered together. We missed you." I stared at the words until they blurred. No need to apologize. I felt a bitter laugh catch in my throat. She was acting like I'd just been away on a long vacation, like the text erasing me from the bloodline had never happened. No mention of the 4-year blackout. No mention of the 3, not 4 Facebook post. Just a clean, tactical wipe of the past. 2 weeks later, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. Usually I don't pick up, but something told me this was the second wave. "Caitlin, is that you?" It was Victoria. Her voice had that same sharp, fake sweet tone she used when she wanted a favor or a new pair of shoes. "Mom's been real sick lately. She's missing you so much, honey. We all are. Why haven't you called?" I didn't answer. I just looked out at the fields. I'd already checked the intel from Rachel. Just yesterday, Margaret had posted a photo of herself at a high-end spa in Richmond, wrapped in a white robe with a cucumber mask on her face, looking healthier than a thoroughbred. They weren't looking for a daughter. They were looking for a trophy. The local news had picked up the story of my Officer of the Year award. My face, in full-dress uniform, was all over the Richmond Times-Dispatch. To the Fairbanks, I wasn't an ordinary soldier anymore. I was a major with a governor's award. I was a major with political capital. The proof came an hour later. Rachel sent me a batch of screenshots from a new group chat, one I wasn't invited to. Margaret's messages were frantic, filled with exclamation points and greed. "Great news! Caitlin's being honored. We need to get there early and grab the VIP seats right at the front. Victoria, wear that red Valentino dress, the one with the deep cut. Bradley, bring Carolyn. This is our chance to show everyone the Fairbanks family always stands together." They were planning to hijack my ceremony. They wanted to sit in the front row, soaking up the camera flashes, pretending they were the ones who put those medals on my chest. They wanted to steal the glory of a woman they'd left for dead in the dirt 4 years ago. I felt the old familiar pressure building behind my eyes. My jaw ached from clenching it. There wasn't a single word about my actual life. Not a question about Marcus or Lily. Just the VIP seats and the Valentino dress. I was a prop to them, a political accessory. I sat there for a long time, the cold coffee long forgotten. I wondered if I was losing my humanity by wanting to hit back, if I was just as cold as they were. A shadow fell over the porch. Marcus stepped out, leaning against the wooden railing. He didn't ask what was wrong. He just looked at the phone in my white-knuckled grip. "They're coming, ain't they?" he asked. His voice was steady, grounded. "They think they can just walk in," I said, my voice sounding like gravel. "They think they can sit in the front row and claim the last 4 years didn't happen. They want the stage, Marcus." He walked over and placed a heavy, calloused hand on my shoulder. The warmth of it anchored me. "You survived the war zone, Caitlin. You survived the mud and the shrapnel. You don't owe a damn thing to people who deserted you when the firing started. You don't owe 'em forgiveness, and you sure as hell don't owe 'em a seat." He was right. In the military, desertion is a crime. In a family, it's a death sentence. I looked back at the screen. I could have called the military police. I could have had their names removed from the guest list and watched them get turned away at the door by armed guards. That would have been the easy way out, but I wasn't gonna play defense. I was a combat medic. I knew exactly where to cut to make it hurt. I chose the tactics of a sniper. I wasn't gonna build a wall to keep him out. I was gonna open the door. I'd let him in. I'd let him wear their Tom Ford suits and their Valentino dresses. I'd let him sit in those VIP chairs, grinning for the cameras, thinking they were back in control. I'd let him walk right into the kill zone. And then I'd let the truth do the rest. It's been a long time since I felt this kind of cold focus, but I need to know. Have any of you ever had a family that only showed up when you were winning? Have you ever had to set a hard boundary just to keep your soul intact? If you think justice is long overdue for people like Margaret, hit that like button and comment, "Justice," to stand with me. Your support helps me finish this fight. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the kitchen, the light from a single bulb casting long shadows across the floor. I pulled out a fresh yellow legal pad and a pen. I didn't write a thank you list. I didn't write about teamwork or duty. I started writing my acceptance speech, my final report. The Fairbanks thought they were going to a celebration. They didn't realize they were walking into their own court-martial. 3 days out. That's when the fuse started to sizzle. I was in my office at the regional command, the air conditioning humming a low mechanical tune that did nothing to cool the fire in my gut. My desk was clear, except for my service cap and the yellow legal pad containing the words that would soon set a city on fire. The secure line on my desk chirped. One sharp, urgent ring. I picked up. "Major Lewis." "Major, it's General Hart." My spine straightened instinctively. General Eleanor Hart didn't do small talk. She was a woman who had spent 30 years chewing on glass and spitting out victory. Her voice sounded like a gravel truck grinding gears on a steep Appalachian grade. Right now, she sounded pissed. "Lewis," she barked. "Some woman calling herself Margaret Fairbanks has been hounding the protocol office for the last 48 hours. She's demanding a 5-minute slot on the program. Claims she needs to speak about the sacrifice of a mother in raising an award-winning officer. She even tried to pull rank with my chief of staff, telling him she has friends in the governor's circle." I felt the blood drain from my face, replaced by a cold, numbing anger. My mother. She hadn't paid a dime toward my tuition. She hadn't shown up to a single promotion. She hadn't sent a damn postcard when I was bleeding in a field hospital. But now, with the cameras ready to roll at the state capitol, she wanted her 5 minutes of fame. She wanted to stand in front of 500 people and claim my sweat as her own. "I'm sorry, ma'am," I said, my voice as flat as a heartline. "I didn't authorize that." "Damn right you didn't," Hart grumbled. "I told my staff to bury her request in the shredder. This ceremony is about the work you did in the trenches, Lewis. It's about the lives you saved while people like her were sipping mimosas at a country club. I'm introducing you myself. We're doing this by the book. My book. Not the Fairbanks social calendar." I let out a breath I'd been holding since I was 18. "Thank you, ma'am." "Don't thank me. Just be ready. Wear the Class A's. Shine the brass until it blinds 'em. We're gonna show Richmond what a real Fairbanks looks like." That night, I didn't sleep. I spent 4 hours polishing my jump boots until I could see the reflection of my own tired eyes in the leather. I starched my uniform until the creases were sharp enough to draw blood. I was a soldier preparing for a breach. I wasn't going to a party. I was going to a reckoning. Friday afternoon arrived with a heavy, humid heat that clung to the marble pillars of the Virginia State Capitol. The building felt like a fortress of history, cold and imposing. Inside, the grand hall was a sea of blue, green, and khaki. 500 chairs, all filled with the heavy hitters of the Commonwealth, politicians, lobbyists, and rows of high-ranking brass with enough ribbons on their chests to wallpaper a room. I stood in the wings, my heart thudding a slow, tactical rhythm against my ribs. I looked out at the front row. Marcus was there. He wore a charcoal suit that fit his broad shoulders perfectly, his hands, those big, calloused farmer's hands, resting steadily on his knees. Lily sat next to him, wearing a yellow dress with white daisies. She looked like a drop of sunshine in a room full of shadows. They were my line in the sand, my real family. Then the delegation arrived. The Fairbanks clan didn't just walk in, they staged an invasion. They marched down the center aisle like they owned the damn marble under their feet. Margaret led the charge, wrapped in a cream-colored Chanel suit that probably cost more than a year's worth of military housing allowance. Her hair was sprayed into a rigid helmet of perfection. Victoria followed, wearing a red Valentino dress that was loud, aggressive, and cut far too low for a military ceremony. She wanted every lens in the room to find her. Bradley was at the tail end, looking like a nervous accountant in a Tom Ford suit that was trying too hard to scream, "Old money." They didn't sit in the back. They shoved their way into the second row, right behind Marcus. I watched Margaret lean over and whisper something to a colonel sitting nearby. Her voice was loud enough to carry through the quiet hall. "I'm Margaret Fairbanks, Caitlin's mother," she cooed, her smile as bright and fake as a department store window. "Everything that girl is today, she owes to the discipline I instilled in her. It's been such a long journey for us as a family." The colonel nodded politely, but I saw the way Marcus's jaw tightened. He didn't turn around. He didn't have to. He knew the truth. I looked down at the legal pad in my hand. The ink was dry. The plan was set. General Hart stepped up to the podium. The room went dead silent. The only sound was the faint hum of the television cameras and the rhythmic clicking of Victoria's high heels as she crossed her legs, trying to get the right angle for a photo. The general looked directly at the second row, her eyes like twin barrels of a shotgun. Then she turned back to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," Hart said, her voice booming through the rafters. "Today we honor a soldier who understands that honor isn't something you inherit. It's something you earn in the dirt." The fuse hit the powder. I stepped out from the shadows and walked toward the light. I didn't look at Margaret. I didn't look at the Chanel suit or the red dress. I looked at the microphone. It was time to give the Fairbanks exactly what they came for. The hall was a frozen tomb. 500 officers, politicians, and press members sat in a silence so heavy it felt like it had a physical weight. General Eleanor Hart stood at the podium, her medals catching the harsh overhead lights like jagged teeth. She didn't look at the teleprompter. She didn't have to. She looked directly at the second row, where the Fairbanks clan sat in their designer armor, and then she looked at me. "Most officers stand here and thank the people who carried them." Hart's voice boomed, amplified and echoing off the marble. "They thank the parents who cheered at graduation, the siblings who had their backs. But Major Caitlin Lewis, she didn't have a safety net. She didn't have a cheering section. She was the safety net. She built her career in the mud with her own two hands, while the people who shared her blood chose to turn their backs because she didn't fit their brand." I stepped out from the wings. Every step was a strike. My jump boots hit that polished floor with a crack that sounded like a rifle shot. My Class A uniform was starched so stiff it felt like a suit of mail. I felt the weight of the silver oak leaves on my shoulders and the row of ribbons on my chest. They weren't just decorations. They were scars I turned into gold. I reached the lectern and gripped the sides. The wood was cold. Real cold. I scanned the room. Marcus was right there in the front row, his face a mask of quiet pride. Lily was swinging her legs, her eyes wide. They were the only ones that mattered. Behind them, Margaret was leaning forward, her face stretched into a bright, predatory smile. She was already half standing, her hand on her pearls, ready to claim her share of the camera flashes. "Thank you, General," I said. My voice didn't shake. not a bit. It was the same voice I used to call in medevacs while the world was blowing up around me. I owe everything I am to the United States Army, to the soldiers who bled next to me, to the brothers who never asked for a bank statement before they pulled me out of a hole. I paused. The air in the room seemed to thin out. And I owe it to my family, I continued, my gaze locking onto Marcus and Lily. To my husband, Marcus, a man who knows that loyalty ain't something you talk about, it's something you do. And to my daughter, Lily. You taught me that being a mother isn't about the blood in your veins. It's about the choice you make to stay when things get ugly. I stopped. I didn't mention the name Fairbanks. I didn't mention the woman in the Chanel suit or the siblings in their Tom Ford finery. I just stared at the back of the room. The silence was deafening. It was a tactical void. Margaret couldn't handle it. The loss of control was a physical blow to her. She didn't just sit there, she stood up. The movement was sharp, desperate. She broke the protocol, ignoring the security detail at the edge of the stage. Her voice, high and trembling with a staged, theatrical grief, cut through the quiet. "Caitlin, baby," she called out, her hands reaching toward the stage. "Surely you haven't forgotten your mother, after everything I did, everything we've been through as a family." A low murmur rippled through the crowd. I saw the cameras swivel. Victoria was already posing, her red Valentino dress like a drop of blood in a sea of olive drab. Margaret started to move toward the steps, her designer heels clicking frantically. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I just leaned into the microphone. 4 years ago, I said, my voice dropping an octave, cold enough to freeze water. On the night before Mother's Day, I received a text. It's a message I've read exactly 47 times. I kept it as a reminder of what a Fairbanks really is. Margaret stopped mid-step. Her face turned the color of ash. The message read, "All my children are successful except Caitlin. She chose to be an ordinary soldier. I no longer consider her my daughter." Those were your words, Margaret. You didn't want the ordinary soldier. You didn't want the mud. You didn't want the girl who didn't make your country club friends feel special. I looked down at her from the height of that stage. I simply followed your orders. I stopped being your daughter that night. And now, you don't get to be the mother of the officer of the year. You're just a stranger in an expensive suit who took a wrong turn. The hall went dead. You could have heard a pin drop on a feather. Margaret's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. She looked around, desperate for an ally. But all she saw was 500 pairs of eyes filled with a cold, professional disgust. She was a deserter, and this room knew how to treat those. "My mother is always mother," she stammered, her voice cracking. "Family ain't a title you get at birth," I replied, my words hitting like hammers. "It's a rank you earn. And you were stripped of that rank a long time ago. My report on the Fairbanks family is closed." I stepped back from the mic. For 4 long seconds, the room stayed in that vacuum. Then, in the front row, a 4-star general stood up. He didn't say a word. He just started to clap, slow at first. Then, the sound of 500 pairs of heavy boots hit the floor in unison. Thud, thud, thud. The infantry salute. It wasn't for the award. It was for the truth. The roar of the applause was a tidal wave that hit the second row and washed over them. Margaret staggered backward, her heels catching on the carpet. She looked small, shriveled. The Valentino red dress didn't look like power anymore. It looked like a warning sign. I walked off that stage without looking back. But I knew the war wasn't over. As I entered the quiet of the corridor, I heard the frantic, rhythmic clicking of high heels behind me. Margaret wasn't done yet. And neither was I. The roar of 500 pairs of boots was still rattling my teeth when we pushed through the heavy oak doors into the side corridor. I needed air. Real air, not the recycled, ego-heavy oxygen of that hall. The hallway was long, lined with white marble that felt as cold as a morgue slab. My own footsteps echoed back at me, sharp, rhythmic, and final. Marcus walked beside me, his hand a steady weight on my lower back. He was carrying Lily. She was resting her head on his shoulder, her small hand clutching the strap of his charcoal suit. They were my clean break. my exit strategy from a life of filtered lies. We were 20 feet from the service exit when the shadows moved. Margaret, Victoria, and Bradley were waiting near the marble pillars. They didn't look like the polished First Family of Richmond anymore. The harsh fluorescent lights of the corridor were unforgiving. Margaret's cream-colored Chanel suit looked yellowed, and her carefully sprayed hair was starting to wilt. Victoria stood to her left, her red dress looking like a fresh wound against the white walls. Bradley was hovering in the back, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, eyes darting toward the security cameras. The Golden children looked like they'd just seen a ghost, and in a way, they had. "Caitlin!" Margaret's voice cracked, echoing off the high ceiling. She rushed forward, her heels clicking frantically. She was crying, but it wasn't the kind of grief you feel for a lost child. It was the frantic, messy panic of a woman whose social credit score had just hit 0. "How could you do that, in front of everyone? You humiliated me. You humiliated your brother and sister." I stopped. I didn't reach for my holster, but I felt my body shift into a combat stance. Back straight, chin down, eyes locked on the primary threat. "I didn't do anything, Margaret," I said. My voice was low, vibrating in the narrow space. "I just told the truth. If the truth feels like humiliation, that's on you. You built the stage. I just delivered the lines you wrote." "It was misinterpreted," she shrieked, her face turning a blotchy, uneven red. Her expensive eyeliner was smudging, leaving dark streaks like oil spills on her cheeks. That text, it was a private moment of frustration. Every mother says things she doesn't mean. You took it out of context to hurt me. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I reached into the pocket of my Class A tunic and pulled out my phone. I didn't have to search. The screenshot was pinned to the top. I turned the screen toward her, thrusting it 6 inches from her face. "This is the command you issued 4 years ago," I said, my thumb hovering over the text. "I no longer consider her my daughter." "There ain't no context for that, Margaret. It wasn't a moment of frustration. It was an execution. You didn't just want me gone. You wanted me erased so I wouldn't embarrass you at your club lunches." She flinched as if I'd slapped her with a wet towel. She tried to grab the phone, but I pulled it back, my movement fast and precise. Bradley stepped forward then, trying to use that reasonable lawyer tone he'd spent 30 years perfecting. He straightened his Tom Ford tie, but his fingers were shaking. "Caitlin, let's be adults here," he muttered, not meeting my eyes. "Think about the PR fallout. The Fairbanks name is a brand in this state. People are already tweeting about this. You're destroying the only thing that gives us leverage. We can fix this. We can put out a joint statement, a reconciliation story." I looked at my brother. I saw the cowardice buried in the creases of his expensive suit. He didn't care that I'd been alone for 4 years. He didn't care about the medals on my chest. He just cared about the brand. "The Fairbanks name?" I let out a short, dry laugh that sounded like a gunshot. "I stopped using that name 3 years ago, Bradley. Check the public records. My name is Caitlin Lewis. My husband gave me a name that stands for something. He gave me a name that comes with loyalty. You? You're just a guy in a suit who's afraid his country club membership is gonna get revoked." Bradley's mouth snapped shut. He looked like I'd just stripped him of his bar license. He backed away, retreating into the shadow of a pillar, leaving Victoria to face me. Victoria didn't look sad. She looked venomous. Her face, tight from too much Botox and filler, was twisted into a sneer. "You think you're so much better than us now, don't you?" She spat, her voice a jagged rasp. "Just because you got a shiny piece of tin on your chest and a bunch of old men in uniforms clapped for you. You're still just a dirt under the fingernails soldier. You'll never be one of us." I took one step toward her. Just one. I didn't have to do more. I'd spent years training for intimidation. Victoria had spent years training for brunch. She stumbled back, her heels catching on a marble seam. "I don't want to be one of you, Victoria," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than her scream. "Being one of you means being hollow. It means being afraid of the truth. I ain't better than you. I'm just real. I'm a woman who knows what it's like to bleed for something. You're just a dress with nothing inside it." I turned back to Margaret one last time. She was leaning against the wall, her hand over her heart, looking for a pity that wasn't coming. You chose the image over the daughter, I said, and now the image is shattered. Don't call me. Don't send Rachel to do your dirty work. This ain't about revenge, Margaret. It's about a boundary. You told me I wasn't your daughter. I'm finally agreeing with you. I didn't wait for her to respond. I didn't care if she fell or if she screamed. I turned my back on the Fairbanks family, my boots clicking one last time on the marble floor. I grabbed Marcus's hand. He squeezed it, a firm, calloused grip that told me everything I needed to know. I took Lily from him, shifting her weight onto my hip. She smelled like sunshine and the farm, a clean scent that washed away the stale perfume of the hallway. We reached the heavy glass doors at the end of the corridor. The afternoon sun was pouring through them, blinding and gold. I pushed them open. The heat of the Virginia summer hit me, but it felt good. It felt honest. I didn't look back at the dark hallway or the people left in it. I walked out into the light, my head held high, leaving the ruins of the Fairbanks family to rot in their own silence. The war was over. I was finally home. The fallout from that afternoon at the state capitol didn't just fade away like a bad dream. In Richmond, reputation is a currency more valuable than gold. And the Fairbanks family had just filed for total moral bankruptcy. The footage of my speech didn't just stay in Virginia. It hit the internet and tore through the social circles of the East Coast like a wildfire in a dry forest. People didn't see a prestigious family being misunderstood. They saw a mother in a Chanel suit who had tried to trade her daughter's blood for a few minutes of hollow fame. The ivory tower was cracking, and the sound was loud enough to wake the dead. The dominoes fell hard, one by one. 1 month after the ceremony, the phone at the Fairbanks estate stopped ringing. The invitations to the gala season never arrived. Margaret was asked to step down from the board of the Westbrook Club. They didn't want the nasty publicity of a woman who'd publicly disowned a war hero. I heard from Rachel that Margaret tried to fight it, screaming about her legacy while the silver rattled on the fine china. But the elite of Richmond are vultures. Once they smell a carcass, they don't help. They just finish the job. They scrubbed her name from the committees before the weekend was over. Victoria's medical practice took a direct hit, too. Her Yelp page was flooded with one-star reviews from people who didn't even know her, but they knew exactly what she was. A fake. A woman who valued Botox over brotherhood. She ended up locking her social media accounts and hiding behind the tinted windows of her SUV, terrified of a camera lens. Bradley? He was the quietest casualty. He was quietly removed from the high-profile litigation teams at his firm. No one wanted a golden boy lawyer who couldn't even stand up to his own mother. They were trapped in the very cage of vanity they'd spent 30 years building. 1 year passed. Autumn in the foothills is a different kind of season. It's a time of harvest, of hard work, and the smell of wood smoke mixed with damp earth. I was sitting on the back porch of the Webb farmhouse, the morning air crisp enough to make my lungs feel sharp and clean. I had a heavy ceramic mug of black coffee in my hand, no sugar, no cream. Just the way Marcus makes it. The weight of the mug was comforting, a solid thing in a world that used to be made of smoke and mirrors. The mailman's beat-up truck rattled down the gravel driveway, leaving a plume of red dust behind. He dropped a single envelope in the box and drove away. I didn't get much mail here. Most of my life was digital or military. I walked down to the gate, my boots crunching on the gravel, and pulled out the envelope. It was heavy, cream-colored paper. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was Margaret's elegant, looping script, the kind she used to write out dinner menus for guests she didn't even like. I sat back down on the porch and tore it open. There was no Caitlin dear this time, no demands for an apology. The letter was short, and the ink was blurred in places. For the first time in my life, Margaret Fairbanks sounded worn thin, like an old rug that had been beaten against a wall one too many times. She wrote about the silence in the big house in Richmond. She wrote about how Bradley didn't visit anymore and how Victoria was obsessed with her own crumbling image. She sounded broken. She admitted she was afraid. She said she'd spent her whole life following a script of what a perfect family should look like, and that my choice to be a soldier had been a smudge on her masterpiece. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She wasn't that brave, but she admitted she'd failed. She'd lost her daughter because she couldn't stand the sight of dirt under my fingernails. I finished the letter and looked out over the cornfields. The stalks were golden, swaying in the wind. I didn't feel a surge of joy. I didn't feel the need to laugh at her misery. I just felt a profound, hollow emptiness. I analyzed that letter the same way I analyzed a patient's chart or a battle report. Margaret's love was never a gift. It was a business contract. I was an asset she'd invested in, and when I didn't pay the interest in social prestige, she'd liquidated the debt. The betrayal wasn't about me being ordinary. It was about her being bankrupt of a soul. I didn't reach for a pen. I didn't look for a stamp. I didn't owe her a response, not even a rest in peace. I walked over to the old metal trash can at the edge of the porch, the one we used for burning scrap paper. I dropped the letter inside and struck a match. I watched the flame take hold, the cream-colored paper curling and blackening, the elegant handwriting vanishing into gray ash. A soldier has no business going back onto a dead battlefield to bandage the people who tried to shoot them in the back. A boundary, a real, tactical boundary, isn't a wall you build out of anger. It's a steel door that you have the only key to. You don't have to hate the person on the other side. You just have to decide that they no longer have the coordinates to your heart. Marcus walked out of the barn then, his boots caked in mud, a tired but honest smile on his face. He had Lily on his shoulders. She was wearing a tiny pair of overalls, her hair a mess of tangles and hay. They were laughing about a goat that had tried to eat Marcus's hat. "Everything okay, honey?" Marcus asked, stopping at the bottom of the steps. I looked at them. The real family. The one I didn't inherit, but the one I'd earned with every choice I made. "Everything's perfect," I said. And I meant it. I stood up, my back straight, my shoulders square. I wasn't just a Fairbanks who got lucky. I am Major Caitlin Lewis. I am a wife. I am a mother. And I am finally, truly, out of range. This is the end of my journey, but I know many of you are still in the trenches with your own Fairbanks families. If this story gave you the strength to close your own steel door, I want to hear from you. Comment freedom below and share one boundary you've set for your own peace. Your courage is the only legacy that matters.